Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming. This is Big Questions. In case you don't know, Big Questions is a space to explore big topics about life, its meaning, and what Christianity has to say about them. So what's going to happen is Graham, our speaker, is going to come up and address the question, irrational. Is faith intellectually credible? And then we'll have a couple of minutes for discussion around tables. And then we'll have a Q&A session. So throughout the talk, be thinking of some questions. You can text them into the number that's about the room. So I'll hand over to Graham. Give him a warm Cambridge welcome.
Good afternoon. Thanks so much for coming. It's great to see you here. My name's Graham. I was at an event like this as a fresher 16 years ago, just about to start studying history at Homerton College. Is there any Homertonians here? Good to see you. A couple of you made the long trip in. It's good to see you. And it's great to be here. As I was thinking about coming, I realized that I now live in East London, got three kids, that we're now closer in time to the day that my 7-year-old starts university than we are to the day that I started university. So thank you so much for prompting a premature midlife crisis for me as I thought about the passing of time and how quickly it is. But it's an exciting time of year. I love this time of year, the start of a new academic year. People coming back to Cambridge or starting afresh at Cambridge. I hope you've enjoyed your first few days here if you're a fresher. And we're thinking about this question of rationality, of what does it mean to be rational. And I'm sure we would all agree that rationality is the foundation of a university, of an institution like Cambridge. I don't know whether you read or perhaps you heard the Vice-Chancellor's speech last Monday at the beginning of the academic year. It got sent through to me on one of the kind of alumni mailing lists that I haven't managed to unsubscribe from. And the Vice-Chancellor, Stephen Toop, said that he wanted Cambridge to be an unstoppable, unapologetic force for knowledge and understanding, for more inclusive community, and for the betterment of our shared world. That's what Cambridge is about, knowledge and understanding, reason and rationality. Whatever subject you've come to Cambridge to study, knowledge and understanding have to be at the very foundation of a university like this. And many would argue that means that any kind of religious faith, any kind of supernatural, belief in the supernatural, particularly any kind of faith in the kind of core claims of Christianity, needs to be left behind. If we're really pursuing knowledge and understanding, then those kind of ideas that there is something beyond the natural world need to be abandoned. Stephen Hawking, the celebrated physicist who died recently, he said this: there is a fundamental difference between religion, which is based on authority, and science, which is based on observation and reason. And science will win because it works. There's a fundamental difference between the two, science and faith, and the one to go for, the one that can claim the territory of knowledge and understanding, is science itself. Or listen to the philosopher Julian Baggini. He explains what it means for him to be an atheist. He says atheism may be defined negatively as opposed to theism, but atheists are first and foremost naturalists, committed to a positive view of the universe as containing only natural entities and forces. And he says this view is not held as a matter of faith, but because that is what the scientific evidence strongly suggests. He's saying if you want knowledge and understanding, then you have to come to the view that in the end only natural entities and forces exist. Now maybe that you're not a kind of committed atheist, a committed naturalist like Julian Baggini, but I guess most of us live in a world where the things that are counted as being reasonable, the things that we can discuss openly and rationally, do not include questions of faith, questions of religion, questions of whether there is a God and what that God is, or who that God is. Religious faith is like having a particular taste in music. It's not something you can debate and discuss. It's not open to rational inquiry. It's not part of reality that's rationally accessible. And so that's the question we're going to be thinking about this afternoon. Can we, as rational people, as people that are part of an institution dedicated to knowledge and understanding, can we engage with the question of whether there is a God, who that God is, and whether there might be anything beyond natural entities and forces? And I want to explore this question, first of all, not by thinking about Christianity, but thinking about rationality itself. If we're going to think about whether rationality and Christianity are compatible, we need to examine both to decide that. I want to think about three elements of rationality. Just think about that with you. First of all, the mystery of reason. The mystery of reason. I wonder if you've ever thought how remarkable it is that the world around us is rationally accessible, that it is open to rational inquiry. We take that for granted, most of us, but it's actually something quite remarkable and quite mysterious. Albert Einstein said the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. There's quite a famous essay that explores this called The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics in the Natural Sciences. I think this was written before they designed clickbait headlines. The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics in the Natural Sciences by the Nobel Prize-winning physicist Eugene Wigner. He wrote this back in 1960. And Wigner looks at what it means to say that there are laws in nature, laws of physics and science. And he says, it is not at all natural that laws of nature exist, much less that man is able to discover them. He says it's remarkable that there are these regularities in nature, and there are these regularities that we are able to discover. But then he pushes it a little bit further. He says that not only that, but what we use to explore and to discover these regularities is mathematics. Often very abstract mathematical concepts that seem to have very little to do with the thing that we're actually investigating. Wigner concludes, it is difficult to avoid the impression that a miracle confronts us here, quite comparable in its striking nature to the miracle that the human mind can string 1,000 arguments together without getting itself into contradictions, or to the two miracles of the existence of the laws of nature and of the human mind's capacity to divine them. So when we're talking about human rationality, we're making some very striking claims about the world that we live in. We're saying that it's regular enough for us to think about laws of nature. We're thinking that the human mind is equipped to discover those laws, and that those laws are discoverable, are discussable, if that's a word, to abstract mathematical concepts, to the laws of logic. So we need to grasp how remarkable it is that human rationality works. What a remarkable fact it is that we have a world open to discovery and minds capable of making it. I wonder how you account for that. Have you ever thought, why is it that the world is like that? What explains it? What accounts for it? That's the first thing, the mystery of rationality. The second thing is the promise of rationality, or the promise of reason. See, we see reason not just simply as a vehicle for understanding the world, but also of a vehicle for making the world a better place. I don't know if you remember what Stephen Toop said, that Cambridge should be an unstoppable, unapologetic force for knowledge and understanding and for the betterment of our shared world. We have an instinctive thought that if we know more about the world, if we understand it better, we can make it a better place. It will be a better place. How often do we hear people say that the solution to social problems is more education? Well, it's why we're so concerned about the rise of fake news in our political discourse. Because we think that truth, we think that knowledge and understanding, human reason, will lead to the betterment of the world. That's why I guess most of us came here to study. Something in our subject piqued our curiosity. We wanted to understand why it was that the world was this way, whether it was the sweep of history, or whether it was the power of words in literature, or whether it was the fundamental laws that shape the way objects behave. There was something that made us think, if I could understand that, the world would be a better place. My life would be better. But if you think about it, that doesn't seem to fit with the way the world is. Why should it be that reason and truth leads to a better state of affairs? Why shouldn't knowledge and understanding just allow the rich to exploit the poor and the strong to dominate the weak even more effectively? What is it that makes us think that there is this connection between truth and goodness, truth and beauty? As Keats wrote in his poem, Ode to a Grecian Urn, beauty is truth, truth beauty. Why on earth would we think that is the case when we look around the world today and we see Rohingya, and we see the Yemen, and we see Syria? And yet, we can't abandon that idea very easily, I think. That reason, pulling on the thread of reason, pulling on the thread of truth will lead to the betterment of our world, will lead to a world more full of beauty, more full of goodness than it was before. So that's the second thing. The mystery of reason, the promise of reason. But thirdly, the scope of reason. The scope of reason. I had a friend who I studied with here who told me that in an ideal world, he would use a much more rational approach to the question of romance and relationships than most people. Rather than all the faffing about that most people do, he would take a logical approach, and he would just simply look at all the potential romantic partners that he could identify, put their various qualities into a spreadsheet, and having designed the right algorithm, decide on which one was the best person to ask out. Now, it may not surprise you to know that he studied engineering. It probably will surprise you to know that he's been happily married for over a decade now, though I don't think any spreadsheets were involved. Now, I tell that story just to point out that actually there are certain questions in life that are not susceptible to the same kind of mathematical investigation or empirical observation that discovering the laws of nature are open to. Matters of the heart, matters of beauty, just don't work like that. I imagine most of us would think that my friend was actually being quite irrational to think that a spreadsheet was the answer to his love life problems. I think he may have been joking when he told me that. You see, we realize that there are limits to what can be rationally, what can be indubitably proved by logical deduction and empirical observation. But the reality is that actually applies to reason itself. That applies to our use of our rational faculties. You see, any half-decent philosopher will tell you that you cannot in the end prove that your rational faculties, that your senses give you an accurate picture of the world. For the fact that you have to use those rational faculties, you have to use those senses to answer that question. So you have to rely on the thing that you're trying to prove. None of us can really be sure that we're not hooked up to some machine somewhere that's pumping in false images to our mind's eye. So when we use our senses to tell us what the sky looks like or what a flower smells like, we're not taking a kind of logically bomb-proof position. We're actually taking a step of faith. There is a limit to what reason can finally prove, and that includes the reliability of reason itself. Now the question is taking that step of faith justified in trusting our senses? Do we live in a world where it is reasonable to believe that our senses do give us an accurate picture of the world? What can account for the fact that the human mind, mathematical concepts, and the natural world mesh together so well? What explanation is there for that? Well, let's look at one of the explanations, the idea of naturalism that we heard about at the beginning. The idea that there is only natural entities and forces in the world. What happens if we think with Francis Crick, the discoverer of DNA, that your joys and your sorrows, your memories and ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will are in fact nothing more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules? Well, we'd have to say that in that case, there is really no explanation for the regularity of the universe. What reason do we have for thinking that the patterns we've discovered so far will always be reliable? And we'd also have to say, why should our minds be capable of discovering them? Why should our minds be equipped for truth if they are just the product of matter, motion, time, and chance? As John Gray, the atheist philosopher, writes in this book, 7 Types of Atheism, he says the human mind is programmed for survival, not for truth. If naturalism is true, then a rationally intelligible universe is the last thing that we should expect to find. And rational creatures are the last thing we should expect to be. And also, if naturalism is true, then any hope that truth, beauty, and goodness will coincide, any hope that the pulling on the thread of truth will lead to a better world, well, it's just a vain hope. It's a blind step of faith. As Bertrand Russell put it, only on the firm foundation of unyielding despair can the soul's habitation henceforth safely be built. So naturalism, atheism, fails to explain the regularity of nature, fails to account for our capacity to discern it, and fails to give any hope that actually understanding the world will lead to a better world. Is there an alternative, though, to naturalism, to atheism? Well, you won't be surprised to find that I think there is, and that many other people think there is. And I want to just take a brief moment in the time we have left, before you guys get a chance to ask me questions, to look at some words in this little booklet. This is a version of John's Gospel. If you turn to page 4, you should have one on your table or on your chair. You turn to page 4 and the beginning of John's account of the life of Jesus. And John says this: "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind." And what John is claiming here, John is making a big claim here. The word there that in English is translated word with a capital W is the Greek word logos, from which we derive our word logic and logical. And philosophy at the time believed that there was a logos, there was a logic to the way the world was made. There was an order and a structure to the way things were. And John is saying that he knows who that logos is, what it is that gives reality that order. He's saying, I have the explanation for the regularity of the universe. And it is the fact that the universe is made by the logos. The reason why nature obeys laws is because nature is made by a lawgiver. And the reason why we're able to understand it is that we're made in the image of that lawgiver. Here's the answer. Here's the explanation to the mystery of reason. But look what John says. He says he's not just saying that there is some sort of abstract, impersonal force at the heart of the universe. He says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. John is saying that there is a relationship at the heart of the universe. What he will go on to explain is the relationship between the Father, Son, and Spirit. That at the heart of the universe isn't just abstract philosophical concept, but relationship, personhood, truth, beauty, and goodness. That those mesh together because those are found at the center of reality, in the light that gives life to all men. That's why we think that truth is the root to beauty and goodness. Because it is. Because in the end, at the center of things, those things do coincide, do cohere in the life of the Father, Son, and Spirit at the center of reality. But later on, John makes an even more extraordinary claim, and with this we'll finish. Verse 14 there, just about 2/3 down the page, he says, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." John is saying that Logos has stepped into the world. The Word has become flesh and blood like you and me, a human being. And because he's come in the flesh, he's left a historical trace, a book like this. Eyewitness accounts, a new community of people, a transformed world in the wake of his teaching. A historical trace that you can investigate, that's open to rational inquiry and to thought. But he says the Word didn't come just to sort of open itself up to that kind of investigation. But the Word came to bring grace and truth. The Word came, Jesus came to restore our relationship with the God who made us. To deal with the brokenness that's come with our preference for lies rather than truth. To deal with the way that we've turned away from the one who's made us and lived in the delusion that the universe is all about us. John says that the Logos has come to restore the world to the kind of place where beauty is truth and truth beauty. Now, if this is new to you, I'm sure I wouldn't expect you to accept all of that at once. It's part of a rich and deep story, but it is a story that you can look at, you can investigate, you can think through. Why not come back to one of these big questions later on in the term as you think about whether or not this account is reliable, whether or not the resurrection really happened, how Christianity relates to other religions. Why not take away one of these copies of John's Gospel and read it with a friend, a Christian friend, see what you make of what John says here. But before I leave you to start peppering me with questions, and please make them as tough and as difficult as you possibly can, let me say two final things. First of all, while you're here at university, while you're here at Cambridge, will you commit to looking at the universe in the eye? Will you commit to rationally thinking through the implications of what you believe? Not just dismissing anything beyond the natural, but failing to grasp what that means. What that means for the reliability of your mind. What that means for the existence of things like goodness and beauty and truth. But actually looking reality in the eye and saying, what world do I live in? What world does the things that I believe tell me to expect from this world? But secondly, as you look at Jesus, as you investigate this book, which I hope you will still butt up against the limits of rationality. The question of whether or not Jesus is to be trusted is not a question of mathematical deduction and axioms. It's a question of relationship. It's a question of trust. Just like we have to trust that our rational senses give us an accurate view of the world, Jesus comes to us as a person and says, will you trust me? And in the end, that won't be able to be answered with a spreadsheet. And you'll have to decide whether or not you think that the person who is presented here in this book, the person who says that he died for you in your place, the person who says he's risen so that you can have new life, is he trustworthy? Can I give him my life? That might mean massive changes, big fundamental changes, the way that you look at life, the way you live your life. But it's a question that all of us need to answer as we look at the claims that this book makes. Because the claim that he makes is if you do trust him, you will find yourself in the place that you thought reason would always lead you. A place of joy and truth. A place where truth and beauty and goodness find their fulfillment. And that is a claim that I think we all need to look at and investigate. And why don't we start that by discussing around tables, texting in your questions, and I'd be happy to answer questions as long as I possibly can. Do grab me afterwards if you don't get a chance to. But we'll have a couple of minutes break, and then I'll come back up and answer questions.
Thank you so much for texting in. Keep them coming in. And we might go to the floor as well. We've got a question here. I don't see why the world should owe us truth, beauty, and goodness.
Great, thank you. That's a really good question. Why should we expect, why should the world owe us truth, beauty, and goodness? And I think the answer is that it doesn't. This is the question we're trying to answer. Why is it that we instinctively think that truth, beauty, and goodness are out there? Now, you say, I don't know, do I think that? It's very difficult, I think, as a human being to believe, to live as if everything I believe is neither true nor false, everything I desire is neither good nor bad, everything I like is neither beautiful nor ugly. Instinctively, we invest things with those kind of value judgments. We say, no, there is real truth. This is a lie, and that is reality. Now, the question is why do we do that? If the rest of the world is just a kind of random pattern of atoms bouncing around in a random universe, driven by time, matter, motion, and chance, why is it that we, as part of that universe, want to sort of say, oh, no, hang on a minute, there are some things that are good and some things that are bad. There are some things that are beautiful and some things that are ugly. The very fact that we make those value judgments raises the question, where do those ideas, where do those concepts come from? And as I say, it's very hard to live as if they're just entirely made up, as if they're just a sort of social construct. And I think that's one of the biggest clues that we have, that actually there is more to reality than natural entities and forces. That actually those judgments we make pick out something about reality. That there is something objectively good about the birth of a child and something objectively bad about the death of a child. That those are not just kind of ethereal things we impose upon reality. Those are things we actually discern in reality. And if we discern goodness in reality, then we're discerning something that isn't just simply a natural entity or a force. And we have to ask ourselves, where does that come from? And John's Gospel, among many other things, is wanting to help us to understand where those things come from. So I hope that's something of an answer to that. As I say, come and grab me if you'd like to, if I've not really got to the nub of your question.
Great. Thank you for texting. There's loads coming in. There's quite a lot along the theme of reasoning works, maths works.
Sure.
Why isn't that enough? Why can't we just live like that because my life's okay?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of kind of avenues we could go down with that. One is to say, it works now. Do we have confidence that it will always work? David Hume, the 18th century philosopher, said, just because the sun has risen every day of our lives and every day that we've we're aware of in history, that it's risen, where does the sun rise? In the east and sets in the west. Just because it does that every day, that gives you that should give you no kind of certainty that the sun will rise in the east tomorrow and set in the west tomorrow. Just to say, if you flip a coin and you flip it heads 10 times in a row, that doesn't tell you anything about the 11th time. And he was trying to say, actually, the laws of nature, we are assuming certain things when we think there are these laws in nature. The second, so what I'm saying about that is that if we just say, well, I don't know, I don't have any explanation for this, I don't have any grounds for believing these laws of nature exist, then actually we shouldn't have any confidence that they'll continue to work in the future. We're taking a blind step of faith. And that's the second thing, is I think that's to say, oh, well, maths works and science works, so why do I need to explain it? Well, if that's fine, as long as you don't want to be a particularly rational person. If you're happy making just kind of blind leaps of faith and saying, well, yeah, I believe in maths, I believe in rationality, I don't know why, I've got no reason to believe that we live in the kind of universe where that is what would happen, well, that's absolutely fine. But if you are part of an institution that is dedicated to the furtherment of knowledge and understanding, then I think I think it's a reasonable question to say, why is that? Why is it that we live in the world where these things work? Just as they say, well, just as you look at a biologist looks at a heart and says, why does that work? Or a physicist says, why do the planets orbit the sun? Or a historian says, why did that war start? Or why did that event happen? Well, surely we should be asking the question, why is it that we live in a world where rational inquiry is possible? And again, I say that the idea there's only natural entities and forces means that we have to take a massive blind step of faith to believe that. Again, if you text in a question like that, please do come back at me.
Yeah, we're going to have to call an end to questions there, sadly.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There are plenty texted in, so please hang around and chat to one another, ask each other those questions, and speak to Graham afterwards as well. Some other things you can do as well, there's some books as you go out at the back. One here is called The Reason for God, by a guy called Tim Keller, who works in a church in New York. And he gets lots of people asking him questions, and so has written a book on it. There's only a couple of copies, but go quickly if you want one. As Graham said, look at those Gospel of John's on your table. And also, there's little feedback cards on your table. If you could fill them out just after we finish, that would be great, just so we can know what you think and what other questions you may have. Please do come to the other big questions throughout the term as well. Next week, we'll have the question, aren't all religions just the same? At the core of them, are they not just different rebrandings of each other? So come and listen to that. And then also, we've got a brand new Facebook page, so go and give that a like if you're interested in coming to future Big Questions talks, and you'll keep updated on them. So thank you all so much for coming. Have a lovely weekend and a lovely rest of your day. If you need to dash off to 2 o'clock lectures, that's absolutely fine, but feel free to hang around, and some desserts will be brought out as well. Thank you.